All right, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Leadership Blend Live podcast with your host, Ricardo Rice, and my co-host,
Simone Sherry.
All right, so it's the beginning. Actually, it's not the beginning of the year. We're in February, so scratch that. It's the second month of the year, so we're a little behind with our annual guests. So we are so excited to have them, none other than Dr. Robert Gaines and the president. I have to say that now. I have to feel that now. She has a flag in the background. It's all presidential. And the president, Dr. Dana Rickman. How are you guys doing today?
We're good, Ricardo.
Doing great, Ricardo. So happy to be here with you guys.
It's an annual thing. Robert makes sure that I remember. I adore him so much for that. He makes sure I remember. And I was like, oh my God, Simone, we need to get it together because
I invite myself every year.
We got to get it together. And
true.
Yeah, so we're gonna make it happen. All right, so today, as we've done since 2018, we are going over the Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education's top 10 issues in education. And like I told our friends, I have a higher stake in this because I spent the last year substituting. So I've got to see a lot of this stuff firsthand. So I'm really excited about the conversation. But before we do that, for those, they have new positions. So I definitely want them to introduce themselves in their new positions and kind of tell what they do in the partnership. So Dr. Gaines, you can go first.
All right. Well, last time I was here, I was the Director of Communications. I am now the Director of External Affairs, which is essentially communications plus a lot of external relationship building and networking. So the role is very much what I was doing before, getting our message out, telling our story, ensuring that folks know what the partnership is about, but it's also ensuring that we're building the right relationships with people who are invested in education and workforce development. So it's kind of like a comms plus job, but it fits my skills and I'm having a blast.
All right, Presidente.
Dana Rickman. I'm the relatively new president of the Georgia Partnership. I was elevated to this post, I guess, last February. So we're going on a year, Robert, which is hard to believe. Can you believe it's been almost a year? No. I can't. And so in my new role, I'm now just a figurehead of this great organization. And we were able to hire a fantastic senior policy analyst named Matt Smith, who did most of the writing around the issue that we're going to talk about today. And so it's just my joy now to lead this organization with great people like Robert and Matt, who are doing all the heavy lifting and all this great work.
I'm so excited. We love when people get promoted, especially people we know. So it's so exciting. Congratulations to you both. So let's jump right in. We'll let you take it away, starting with issue number 1.
All right. Well, first, if you don't mind, I'm going to do a little bit of background about the top 10, just a very little bit to sort of give our viewing and listening audience some orientation into the 10 and kind of where our mind was when we started writing this year's edition.
Okay.
This past year, 2021, it had so many stops and starts where schools were reopening, but then quarantine again. Employers were pausing return work plans, Delta, and now Omicron, blew havoc and everything. And it's really continued. We really thought at this point, 2 years ago, we'd be sort of past this, but it's really continues to upend education, work, society, right? But, again, a crisis without precedent is an unprecedented opportunity to really pause, take stock, and answer some simple questions. And for us at the Georgia Partnership, what we wanted to really dig into were our current education and workforce investments yielding the outcome that we all seek, which is improved personal well-being, more resilient communities, and a secure future for more Georgians. Like, that was the question that we're sort of leading with. Like, do we have those things in place? And so the current edition of the top 10 issues to watch, we submit that generally, we've got some really good assets in place to support these outcomes, but we need to really build on the strengths that are there and really identify and face some blind spots that we have that we need to address and some barriers, and come up with sort of a comprehensive state strategy to ensure that more Georgians continue to be prepared to participate, frankly, in the state's economy. And so that was our mindset going into writing the top 10. In the first issue, equity at the forefront. each of our 10 issues are really going to focus this year on how what we're calling an equity mindset can contribute to sort of reimagining policies and practices to accelerate learning and expand access to opportunity for all Georgians. And in the simplest terms, what we mean by an equity mindset is a recognition that students succeed, frankly, when they receive the resources and tools that address whatever academic and non-academic barriers they have, right? So I'm going to get in that a little bit more, but last year's top 10 issues to watch, we really demonstrated how there was a disproportionate and negative effect, which frankly is continuing, on the most vulnerable Georgians, low-income residents, people of color, those living in rural areas, have been impacted by the pandemic, and the economic downturn and now, frankly, recovery is continuing to exacerbate the gaps that we've always had. And so we felt it was important to really apply this equity lens, this equity framework, to really highlight how the pandemic has widened the opportunity gaps that have existed. So that's the background.
That brings a quick question for me, because I'm really curious about always, especially maybe for you, Robert, like how attention shifts so much when you have these conversations with people, because I feel like for the last 2 years at least, even if everybody's focus was solely on education, on the economic viability of our education model, I feel like between George Floyd and like this huge year of racial unrest, and then between COVID and like this digital divide we were already grappling with, like, does your attention get pulled from, maybe the top 10 issues that had been focusing on before, and maybe like the pillars that are most important before, do they get totally upended and like thrown out the door? Or like, are people not trying to have conversations about anything else, basically?
The answer is yes. So let's see. Yeah, it does, because how we land on the top 10 is usually by way of the relationships I mentioned earlier. We have friends and partners who are doing the work, right? We have a 30,000 foot view. We're not in the schools, we're not in the communities to the degree that some of our partners are. And so we're figuring out what should we anticipate for the coming year. We're writing this in like the fourth quarter of each year with the expectation that the coming year we'll see some of this stuff start to blossom. And so we invest a lot of time in that, but by the time January comes, things can change. And you have to be able to not only anticipate the change, engage the change, but sometimes redirect back to the fact that what we've outlined in the top 10 is in fact a response to some of the things you're talking about. So while some of the issues that are outside of the top 10 can feel like distractions at times, I think one of the things we're really good at is saying, okay, how do we weave this back into what we're saying is important in a way that acknowledges the concerns and the attention of the people who are surfacing these issues without sacrificing all the work and all the time we've invested in the top 10. So, I can think of some issues right now that people are talking about just in the community.
Don't say it, please.
I'm not going there. I'm just and my point simply is, if you get down to the bottom of what is some people are concerned about, I think focusing on the solutions we present in the top 10 really helps address some of those issues. It's just, as you know, language and rhetoric and energy can create such a firestorm that we lose sight of what we actually all probably care about, which is an economically healthy Georgia and students being able to matriculate from pre-K through their post-secondary experiences successfully, and then entering the workforce with viable skills. I mean, I think it's very hard to find a person who doesn't agree with that idea.
Sure.
But what happens in between is where a lot of stuff gets real tricky.
Well, I'm excited. I'm glad we're not going to have an hour-long conversation about critical race theory, because that's the only phrase
no, we are
for the
not.
last year.
No,
So.
no.
Simone, I'm so glad you asked that question, because it gives me an opportunity, one, to brag on Robert, which I love doing, but also to really help put our work in context. That yes, there's a bunch, there's so much noise right now in the discussion of education, and we take it as a challenge to the partnership in a good way to sort of differentiate ourselves. And this is a lot of the work that Robert's been doing, is how do we as an organization be that organization using tools like the top 10 to rise above the noise and sort of part through it and bring together folks to have the real conversations about what's real and help people understand and parse the, what's really going to impact student outcomes, and how do we sort of get above that, the back and forth, and really try to push on issues like, how are we really defining equity? And let's have a conversation about that instead of just, the bumper sticker, easy back and forth. No, you're wrong. No, you're wrong. No, it's this. And so with that transition, we'll get into the first issue. Traditionally, our issues haven't been in any particular order, but this year they are in a really, not an order of priority, but a order of, I guess, common sense. And this first issue of equity, we wanted to be, to your point about all the noise, really clear what we mean by equity and an equity framework, because everything else sort of flows from it. And so from our position and what we highlight in this first issue is, the concept of equity really provides a space for individuals to have conversations honestly about how the past frames the present. We as a state, as a nation, as individual people, we can't move forward without reckoning with the past, especially discriminatory and social economic policies that have disadvantaged certain groups over time and can continue today. But what's important to stress here is, race and ethnicity are the most discussed dimensions of equity, certainly. But for us, there are several other factors that affect opportunity and equity of opportunity that also, so things like gender, income, wealth, and income and wealth are two very different things that need to be looked at differently. Age, geography, where you live, parental education, all of these things need to be considered when we talk about equity. I mean, the list goes on. And so for us, any kind of education workforce strategies that don't consider things like race, income, and these other social economic dimensions are going to fall short of addressing these unequal opportunities that I think we all want to address, because they don't differentiate between individual need. And so, thinking about equity-focused strategies in education, at the very base of it, it's very student-centered, right? Policies and practices that allow for differentiation and personalization. I mean, the most basic example of all would be if you just think about in your mind, a child, a low-income kid living in rural Georgia who could be a struggling reader. Their needs and the resources and the needs that they have are going to be very different than a student living in an urban school system who's in the gifted and talented program that needs advanced instruction in specific subjects, right? That's individualization. Thinking about statewide policy decisions, school transportation is a big issue about how do we fund the transportation system for schools. And an equity lens looking at that, the transportation needs for a rural system look much different than a suburban system, which also look different from an urban system. And so these blanket thinking equal is where we want to go, doesn't get at these differentiated needs. And so that's really what we mean by an equity framework. And so we define it in two ways. One, it's a mindset that state policymakers, advocates, educators need to use when identifying barriers to expand access to education and opportunities. But two, it can be an element of state and local policy. So an example of how that would play out, it's thinking about getting children ready for kindergarten, right? Kindergarten readiness. We know that the sort of barriers to kindergarten readiness fall upon equity, what I would call equity lines, like family income, access to quality healthcare, access to early childhood education, quality early childhood education programs. Differential, access to those things affects a child's ability to be ready by kindergarten. So in an equity mindset, like those are sort of the identifying barrier part. As a tool of policy, thinking about, okay, we have to get all kids ready for kindergarten so that all that our investments in K-12 education are leveraged to their best, ability. What are the barriers that we, as a tool, what can we do to make sure that all kids have access to quality healthcare? All kids have access to early education opportunities, things like that, and thinking about how to leverage these things to bring everybody up to be able to engage at the same level. that's what we mean by equity and equity mindset. And that's kind of the frame that we take through the rest of these issues.
Okay, that was a lot.
Sorry.
So, no,
It
but
makes sense.
You're like, sum it up.
no, but I'm kind of curious about ability, because I did want to know if there's an area, whether it's a physical or a cognitive disability or a disability that Georgia maybe generally or in certain areas does seem to meet the needs of students. Like, is there an area of equity where you feel like there's maybe less of a gap between those who attain and do well and those who don't?
You know, I think one of the sort of unsung gems that we have in Georgia educationally is our, well, there's two. Our Ctae program, which is the college tech ag program that is in the high schools. Traditionally, you would think of that back, you know, in the days of old when I was in school, like the VOTEC programs, where you'd be training for job skills and things like that, like, you know, auto shop and stuff like that. It is not like that anymore. These are the Ctae programs. These kids that are, you know, in high school, like they're partnering with like the chemistry class to come up with, you know, alternative fuel sources in their agricultural classes. I mean, it's very academically rigorous, but it really gets kids on that sort of technical college pathway, but sort of real world skills and things like that. And the kids that participate in the Ctae program, their graduation rate is what, Robert, like 95, 96%?
It's high, yeah.
Because kids are engaged in classes and learning about things that are of interest to them. And it's very rigorous. And we have a really strong Ctae program in Georgia. And I don't think it gets enough credit for what it does. Also, on the post-secondary system, TCSG, our technical college system of Georgia, they do a great job of outreach to like underserved community, because they have they're almost an institution in almost every county, or at least every region of the state. And so if you're looking for, you know, alternative pathways to college, training programs, job ready programs, really, you know, entries into the workforce, quick turnaround training programs, as you know, the industry has changed so much. TCSG does a great job with that. And again, I don't think they get enough credit for how well they really meet the needs of, you know, Georgia citizens.
Okay, y'all are killing our time. Y'all are killing our time. We still on issue number one.
Driest ever episode ever.
All right, so we run into a small issue. So we only have 9 minutes left on this. So what I may have to do is start another one and invite everybody back so we can continue. That's what's probably gonna happen. So we're gonna go for another 8 minutes. And then, like I said, we'll just come back and do another one right after that. I'll just send an invitation so we can do another one. Is that cool?
Yeah.
All right, so we'll go for another 8 minutes. I was gonna skip issue number 2 to go to 3 because it kind of aligns with what we were already talking about, kind of. So let's skip 2 and go to issue number 3.
All right, Ricardo, and I will be brief, my friend. So the core of issue 3 is simply that you know, students' in-school experiences are shaped by their out-of-school experiences, and we call those social determinants. So we list 5 in the report. One is neighborhood. That's just in physical environment where you live. Your community, that's the social context and relationships that are taking place in the community. In the neighborhood, economic stability, education access, and healthcare access. We understand that to the extent that these are available to you, your experience in school may go one way or another. And so we really want to point out the fact that when schools can identify non-academic barriers to learning, they're much better positioned to support students in their learning journey. So one interesting statistic to give you some context is that in 2019, 20% of Georgia school-age children lived in households with incomes at or below the federal poverty level. And that was, for a family of 4, that was around $25,000. So when you have a large percentage of students coming to school and their incomes are not past a certain threshold, that has implications for their food security, their housing security, their access to healthcare, transportation, and students are bringing all of this to the classroom. So what can a school, the leadership and the teachers do to be better prepared for those challenges? And so part of what we were advocating for is this whole community approach to addressing the barriers. If teachers are aware and are equipped to deal with it, and a school can position itself as a hub for providing resources where they may need to go, maybe not being the resource itself, but bringing in these social service entities, nonprofits who can meet families' needs, then that's a role that a lot of schools are already playing. And schools, I think, who are learning to deal with these challenges can learn to play, because whether you agree with it or not, schools are doing a lot right now. We had a meeting or a conversation with Dr. Morsees Beasley down in Clayton County, and the list of things Clayton County is doing for its students is staggering, and it's kind of heartbreaking too, because you feel like schools shouldn't have to do this. Schools shouldn't have to address the broad swath of challenges that students are bringing, but the ones that can do it, that have the resources and are doing it well, I think serve as a model for other districts or schools within districts, right, who serve different demographics, who may need to figure out a way to do the same thing. Because at the end of the day, these students are either going to matriculate through or they're going to drop out. And what you want from a moral, ethical, and economic perspective is for those students to continue on, because if they don't, that introduces a whole nother set of challenges. And one other stat, just to kind of give you some more context, in the report, we note that for people who are more economically oriented, right, for the armchair economists, so to speak, wraparound services and interventions, which are typically what you provide to students in these circumstances, for every dollar invested, it yields $3 of savings in terms of government spending on social and educational, public health, corrections programs.
That makes sense.
So although it doesn't necessarily generate money, it's not like you invest one and you generate three. It does save in the long term on all of the social services that we sometimes have to provide when people are not in a position to take care of themselves. So that's kind of, I don't know how quick that was, but that's kind of the full.
No, that was quick, but I was just gonna ask one question for that. And it is heartbreaking, and my heart broke at 25,000 when you named that, but also
that number's getting worse.
Yeah.
yeah, but also just, so I feel like a lot of this research, I feel like in the partnership, I don't know if a lot of people know a lot about the actual partnership, but I'm wondering for other advocacy things that are going on, like for other bills, like that may seek to like increase healthcare or increase access to healthcare or increase affordable housing, or like, or does this data play a role in helping any of that move? Like, I feel like a lot of your work would probably end up being like using this information to also fuel other initiatives, because especially when you're talking about social determinants, like there's different committees for that, and different, different people you have to talk to, and different boards that are responsible for it. So like, is this also a report, for anybody who doesn't know, that just can be used to fuel all the other stuff, like the groups that are maybe exclusively working on housing, for example?
We hope. I mean, that's the intent. If you look at last year's report, issue 10, and I think even in this issue, we remind our stakeholders and the people who can move the needle that it's going to take more than the education community to get this done. It's going to take every single government agency that has a role in getting folks from point A to B to invest and be committed and being on the same page. Because if the Department of Health or the folks who do housing are not understanding their role in the work, then you're always going to be, I think, a little bit behind where you could be relative to everybody saying, you know what, we see it, we see the big picture, we see that we have a role to play, and we want to work in concert to ensure that no child is without housing, no child is without proper health care, no child is without food, because all of it matters. And Dana probably has more to add, but yeah, to your question, Simone, absolutely, we want everybody who's in a position to make a policy decision to have this report and to think about what role they play.
Yeah, we do brief. We provide briefs for House Education and Senate Education, and the leadership there. And for one example that comes to mind that's really exciting for us, that I don't want to overstate our role here. To be fair, we were tangential to this whole thing, but it was several years ago, I'm going to say like 2014, 2015, like it's been a while. We had one of our critical issue forums, which raises up the topics that are in the top 10, and it was around children's mental health and the crisis that we see in Georgia, because that is such a determinant of education outcomes. Like, we're very concerned about that. And from the stage of the forum, a person by the name of Gary McGivney, who worked for the Georgia DOE at the time in the school climate, really called out and said, we need a state commission akin to the commission that did the Justice Reform Commission to really look at this issue of student mental health and challenge sort of the leaders in the room to do that. And I'm proud to say, however many, and then we continue to write about it in the top 10 in school climate and these non-academic barriers that the David Ralston is sponsoring a massive overhaul bill this session around mental health for adults and children. And really, it's a massive undertaking, and it's a huge win for the mental health field, that they're looking at not only access issues, but payment issues and the whole workforce pipeline around mental health service providers. And it's a huge thing that has happened, and it's taken years, but I'm very excited to be able to talk about that. And in the small role that we play, there are others that have a much more significant role, but it's great legislation. And that's one I'm pretty proud of.
All right, so we're gonna take a break, and I've sent everybody another link. So we're gonna get out of this one and just jump right back into the next one. Simone, I text you, Robert, I emailed you. So everybody's jump on that link.
All right.
Perfect.
All right.
I will. All right. I'm gonna forward it to you, Dana.
Okay.
All right.